March 18. Agenda. Welcome, new CNABBERS. Who's new here?
Let's see.
Is Ben new?
Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, my name's Tazeen. I am a product manager on the software distribution team in CNABBERS.
Cool.
My first time on the call today. Nice to meet you.
Welcome.
Welcome. Yeah. Cool.
And do we know Ben? Ben, have you been here before, or am I just the one that doesn't know you?
I've been here once. I can introduce myself again. My name is Ben Whiting. I'm a software engineer at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. Good to be here.
Yep. Welcome.
Great. Welcome. Yeah. Cool. Okay, we got two new CNABBERS. In case you didn't know, our mascot, I'm not sure whether it's official yet, but our working mascot is literally a crab. It's a cute reddish crab. We're trying not to do copyright infringement with the Rust mascot.
So we'll just call it
okay.
our mascot and be done with it. That's about as official as we get right now.
Exactly. Okay, second thing on the agenda, optional invocation images. This is Glenn, and this is related to issue 352. Let me post a link for everyone right here. Radu did. Okay, great. Glenn, would you like to take it away here?
Yeah, so we've been looking at this declarative installation support for a few months, and we've got some good proposals about the ways to kind of extend the metadata, put extensions in to please Kubernetes, if you like. But the sticking point that we're currently at is that the Kubernetes community, or certainly the MapBU, i.e. VMware contingent, are nervous about invocation images. And if we could have a CNAB without an invocation image, that would solve a lot of our problems. It actually gives us a decent format. We can do image relocation. We can leverage some of the security stuff that's coming down the pipe, etc. So I thought I'd have a go with an issue which I put up in a pull request, and I've had a little bit of feedback from Carolyn and Radu on the pull request, but it hasn't been widely socialized yet. But the basic idea is to make invocation images optional, and of course you can't use a standard CNAB runtime to install a bundle. In that case, you have to have a runtime that understands the specifics of the bundle, either an extension or some metadata out of band inside the bundle, maybe in a thick bundle, that kind of thing. And so it's a rather different beast to our normal CNABs, which can be installed using any standard, any runtime that conforms to the spec. So going in that direction, I thought, what would it take? So just making the invocation image optional was part of the solution. That's kind of obvious. But what else falls out of the spec? And it seemed to me that parameters, credentials, and outputs were kind of tied to the interface to an invocation image. You know, the idea is you map those things into the invocation image and you map the outputs out the other side. So my first attempt was to say, let's say if there's no invocation image, then you don't have any parameters, credentials, or outputs. But that seemed to be disturbing to Carolyn, at least, and possibly Radu. So I think that's a good area to discuss now.
I had a question about that too. So if one of the credentials that kubectl, for example, wanted, or Sheaf wanted, is the kubeconfig, and we're not doing credentials anymore, how is that even happening?
Well, that'd be a deal between the tool in question, like Sheaf or kubecontrol, and its environment. So it could get its credentials anyhow. It doesn't have to be specified in the bundle, because this tool knows that it's targeting Kubernetes, right? So it's going to do all the normal things for Kubernetes. It'll make choices about the way it does parameterization, credentials, etc., specifically for Kubernetes. And the bundle doesn't really need to specify that because it's a known quantity. The bundle can focus on the application-specific pieces.
Have you looked at any of the proposals from Jacob about like being able to pass in a credential and having it be limited to exactly what the bundle needed in order to prevent what I think you had been so concerned about this entire time, which was elevated privileges being given to the bundle.
Yeah, and that was a good step in the right direction, but it wasn't sufficient to capture the certainly the VMware use cases.
If I may, it seems to me that if we walk back to the conversation that's been ongoing, which is basically the different gradations of possible implementations, right? Bullet one was basically the bundle points at a bunch of manifests, functionally speaking. Bullet two was the ability to sort of use or enable runtimes to swap out to known invocation images that are trusted, functionally speaking, and also apply several of what I think are very good suggestions to restrict the usage of credentials to, scope to a particular action and then destroy it actively and things like this. So that was the second bullet type of implementation, if I understood it correctly. And the third is, I don't even remember the third because I think it's what we have now, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So the use case here, I think as originally stated, the issue was, the abstract issue seemed to be the attempt to have confidence in the execution process. And the bullet two enables us to actually establish that abstract use case. That is, we can posit a well-known installation image. That installation image can be verified, signed, the whole thing. And if it is used everywhere, it does only that one thing, for example. But I think in the course of the conversation back and forth, certainly now that we've been focused on it, I think in the last 3-4 weeks, because I don't think people really were focusing on it, they were focusing on other issues. It really does seem to be that the proposal that we have here aims at a particular implementation and not at an abstract goal. The implementation is the use case, not the abstract goal. Or to put it another way, the implementation meets the judgment of the abstract goal on the parts of Pivotal and VMware and so forth. We'll just say that for now. That I think that other people think, listen, if we have a known and signed base image that does one and only one thing, and that image is used, and we have other ways of restricting the credential usage and so forth, that meets the bar of the abstract goal. And I think we probably have a difference of opinion there. I mean, it does seem to me that the goal to move to an optional image pretty much removes like 90% of the larger goals of CNAB writ large, not outside of Kubernetes, for example. And what that means is basically, if we go forward, I'm not really clear on the specific implementation, but we could amend the PR that you proposed. I'm not really clear on this, how any runtime could do anything with the other CNAB activities other than an action if we accept your PR. So for example, can you figure out any way that other than grabbing the manifest, grabbing the location of whatever manifest there are, and doing the right thing, is there any way you could use, right? I mean, maybe parameter. I guess your runtime would do all that work for you, but other runtimes are currently doing parameter and credential. I'm not really clear exactly how there could be anything other than binary switch on this particular feature. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think image relocation, for example, would continue to work. I think the security supply chain stuff would be okay. That would give us, supply chain of images referred to by the bundle that are validated.
I think if for example, the annotation, like, if a runtime examines a bundle, doesn't see the annotation for optionality, for example, pretty much everything works, right? Like that is that's the end, that's the objective of the proposal, is to make it optional. If it's there, yeah, right, you're going to go ahead and get all the features. Everything works the same way. That's the objective.
Yeah. So another way to put it, and just playing back what you've said,
sure,
we're creating a kind of Kubernetes specific. It actually is not Kubernetes specific practically,
but we use that as a use case.
Yeah, but we're coming up with a declarative only corner of the spec, which is quite different from the rest of the spec. It misses out parameters, credentials, outputs, probably some of the features. So we're kind of diverging the spec in a sense and saying we've got this kind of use case over here, we've got the main use case of CNAB over there, and it is a divergence. So I could accept that we might not want to do that, and that's a reasonable position.
So Jacob's got a question here. Radha, you raised your hand. I have other questions. Of course, this is a very rich issue to discuss. Radha, do you want to jump in?
Glenn, go ahead. Sorry, Jacob. You had a question.
He writes, is VMware working on a CNAB runtime that implements this at the moment?
Well, we shared the Sheaf prototype. That's the closest thing. Okay. And that's not anything to do with CNAB, really. It's kind of, vaguely inspired by CNAB. My agenda is, if we can get something like the optional invocation image support into CNAB, then I would want to make Sheaf produce CNAB bundles in that sense. So at least we've got a standard data format and some standard stuff for image relocation and the security supply chain.
Right. Okay, so we'll go back to my next question, which was the reason I'm driving on the binary conversation, like on, off, what you can dial into, what you can't, is I have a concern that if we like this idea, because it makes the bundle format much more usable across a larger array of scenarios. If we like the idea, I have a concern that it might, well, I guess apparently there is an airport nearby. I have a concern that there may be confusion as to the gradient of features that CNAB signals to users. And so, like, the first thing I would say is it's probably really important for us to decide whether, even as a proposal, it's probably really important for us to decide, like, are we saying CNAB bundle format only? Basically, this is what that is, right? Like, if I'm gonna just say, we like the bundle format. It's a great format. We don't like any of the implementations. And then there's CNAB bundle format with an invocation image. And that has the, X number of features. Yeah, Radu.
If I can interrupt you for a second here. If we remove credentials and parameters and outputs from the CNAB bundle format, is there anything else other than an image list, a plain only image list? Because I think I might be missing something here, but it seems like we only have a JSON, a canonical JSON with some images and their digests. Is there anything else that is left in the CNAB bundle format? We keep using the word bundle format, but the bundle format describes parameters and credentials and outputs and how they should be mapped, right? So Carolyn might have some thoughts here based on the comment that she left on the issue, but on the pull request. But yeah, I think I echo her comments from yesterday's pull request.
And just to answer that, I think the answer is no, but there are also things like the thick bundle format. And then there are the optional bits of the spec, like the security stuff that's coming along and repository representation, which we could still leverage.
Okay, so if we're discussing this proposal, what it sounds like is the bundle format ends up being an array of images, image mappings if you did some relocation work, security information if you wanted to pursue security features related to images, and probably not much else. Does that sound about right?
And the thick bundle format.
And yeah, I'm not able.
So it gives us
to,
a packaging format.
Exactly. Carolyn?
I think that there's one thing that we haven't talked about yet that's kind of the most important part of any spec.
Sure.
Which is compatibility across tools. A bundle made in Porter or in Duffel or in Docker app or Sheaf or whatever. There's always been this expectation that because it was built to the spec, it works with one of the other tools. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's something that has been important to us. That's why we made the spec. I've gotten the impression so far in all these discussions that this is a feature that is only one tool is interested in implementing.
Currently, that's our conversation, yes.
I am getting the impression that if this is put into the spec, we would bifurcate the tooling and the spec in such a way that we would lose that compatibility guarantee effectively. Like, we may have a spec that says these things are all compatible, but effectively we would end up with a tool that can only work with its bundles. And
correct. I would respond.
Like Porter would never run a Sheaf bundle. Same with Duffel or Docker app. And that is a concerning thing to me, that we should be aware that if we did this, that would happen.
And that's exactly why I'm, even to the point of view of discussing the binary nature of this, I'm very concerned about the question of gradient. It's one thing to have this clear path of, kind of a feature fork, if you will, that is specific to a particular type of arrangement. It's another thing to have some opt-in, opt-out of some gradient of features, in which case nobody knows what the hell tool works with anything, that kind of thing. That's one of the reasons. Now, I would respond, Carolyn, to ask you this. There have always been the ability to add custom extensions. And my question is, how, in your opinion, does this differ from a custom extension that one particular runtime implements and nobody else knows anything about?
Some custom extensions are not as drastic as others. Some, if they're not there, the bundle can still go on and it just doesn't have that functionality. For example, Jacob and I were talking about a custom extension that could inject identity into who executed the bundle.
Right.
And if it's there, great, we can give that information. And if it's not, then oops. The custom extension that that's like pre-alpha for dependencies is more do or die. If it's not there and it absolutely needs the bundle, it stops. It doesn't continue.
Right.
And that's something that I know that Datadog's implementation has dependencies and Porter's has dependencies, but I don't think others do. And that's definitely another one that falls in that category of like some support it and bundles either will be able to run with that tool or not. I think that's definitely something like we need to consider when we implement some of these extensions. And we do have a mechanism with custom extensions to say it's a required custom extension. And if the tool doesn't support it, it should not try to run it.
Right.
That's something we have in the spec. Yeah, Radu.
Radu?
I think the main question we've been jumping around but not necessarily asked so far is, yes, the current proposal does not handle parameters, credentials, and outputs in any way. Is there any sort of proposal that would specify how credentials and parameters would be used that we want to talk through? I mean, the way to make the current proposal not tool specific would be to think through and do the work of thinking about how would a certain implementation that is not specific to what we currently have, how would that use parameters and credentials? And if that is useful to any other implementation that what Glenn is targeting currently. Does that make sense? Do we want at some point some proposal to have this ability?
I had to think about that. I mean, it's hard to write something normative.
Especially given that the objective of the proposal, as I understand it, is to have the process consuming the bundle do everything. And as a result, that's pretty wide open. Hi, Jacob. You just saying hi? You want to wait in?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if the objective literally is just to force the bundle to error out if it has no invocation images, or if it can't be handled by the runtime, and to not support invocation images in the bundle, then you could just omit invocation images from your bundle. And the spec right now does say that an invocation image is required. But if you want to be non-normative in your runtime, that's like not a crazy thing to think about, or perhaps even put an invocation image into the bundle that uses a different type or kind. I can't remember what it is, but there's a way to identify an OCI image versus a VM, or and that I think is also not necessarily part of the spec. We might be able to extend that easily to say, okay, here's my invocation image that no runtimes know what to do with other than my own, or runtimes that implement this extension.
Yeah, I mean,
then you do have a valid bundle according to the spec, and you also don't have a bundle that's portable to other runtimes.
The first of those approaches, I'm trying to remember what it was now. Yeah, just omitting the invocation image. I was concerned that tooling would not validate it. That we wouldn't have a schema that we could validate the images even against, because the whole thing would appear to be invalid. So essentially,
but that's a significantly smaller change than anything that's been proposed so far.
True. Yeah.
Also, on the same lines, like parameters and outputs are totally optional, so you can just not put them into the bundles that you generate. You don't have to say that the spec has to ignore them in certain circumstances. If it's just your bundles that you care about, then you can just not use them.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the second approach in your previous statement of having a what was that? Having the invocation image fail in a particular way. Was that? Yeah.
Yeah, that was the runtime flag version.
Yeah, just to add an invocation image that I can't. If I look at the spec really quickly, I can figure out what it is. But there's like a field in there that says,
"Oh, right, yeah,
the type of the invocation image."
Yeah, I mean, if that invocation image type was completely abstract, and we could say that the type was declarative, quotes declarative, end of story, that would be great. But unfortunately, the current spec is quite loaded towards it being a file system. It talks about the attributes of the invocation image as if it was a container or a VM. It's quite biased towards that kind of representation.
Yeah, you have to mount a file system, basically. There has to be a CNAB app run, which, by the way, prevents us from implementing a WASM runtime, for example, which is a binary, right? Radu, you want to chirp up there, young man?
Yes and no. I'm not sure we're at the point where we could seriously talk about a WebAssembly runtime, but even with the current state of the spec, I think we could map certain things to be executed by a WebAssembly runtime. I don't think
if that's the case, I'd be interested pursuing the logical unraveling of that conversation, because a WebAssembly runtime is just another runtime, which the hypothetical declarative runtime process would be just another runtime in this hypothetical conversation. right? Like by default, WASM doesn't have a file assembly. I'm using WASM as an example. It's essentially a text-based binary. It requires a runtime to compile and execute, but outside of that, it's a process bundle. But it's not like a container and doesn't have a file system natively. And so this is another example of where it would be useful working through the possible ways it could be done with the spec to achieve at least the abstract goal, because there's nothing wrong with the abstract goal. Because that might illuminate some of the possibilities that we have. Don't know. I think so.
Yeah, I think WASM is a great example use case as well. Also, like potentially having a serverless function as an invocation option would be interesting. Would help for like really high throughput deployments. So it's something
If I may, at very least, I think we should have a to-do issue to sort of worry off that in associated with these other issues, because I actually think that's a good design and thought process. 30-minute mark. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to flag the to-do item and put my name on it, and anybody else is interested. Obviously, we'll just have an issue. Yeah, Radu.
I think going back for a second to Glenn's pull request, I think historically, so far in the CNAB spec world, tooling came with a need to do something and proposed a change to the spec. And most of the changes so far have been not runtime or at least abstract enough from a specific implementation to claim that the change can be useful to other runtimes as well.
Right.
Right. Or at least the process went through making sure that, yes, this change to the spec is fairly useful to at least another part of another implementation. It certainly feels so far, at least to me, that's my personal opinion. It feels like the changes are definitely suited to a specific runtime and have not necessarily been thought through how would current runtimes benefit from this behavior, or is this behavior beneficial to any other tool out there? I think,
right.
Do people have other opinions about this?
I can easily say I think that's a fair point to make. I do think there is a strong use case being proposed here, that there is a particular runtime. That runtime already has a known process footprint and API surface and things like that. And so the use case of desiring to just basically shell out to that is a desire. That's a fair desire to have. The question is, to your point, very much, is that shareable anywhere else to any other tool, any other environment? That's a fair point to make.
Certainly the spec change of just omitting the invocation image isn't biased towards Kubernetes. If you imagine, 10 years down the road when Kubernetes is history and we're on to the next great thing, that's also declarative, that could use it too. But there aren't that many games in town at the moment.
Right. I don't have a use case that says I want to run WASM, but I can foresee that is an interesting use case in the future, possibly. But I do not have a driving interest to use it at the moment. I'm mindful of the 30-minute mark. Shall we pause here and continue this conversation? Because I think it is rich, even if we didn't have a clear conclusion here.
Yep, thank you for your time. It's been good.
Ooh. So let's see. So I think Ralph, if I understand correctly, is leading the to-dos here.
Yeah. Oh well, I didn't write it down, but my to-do is definitely issue on WASM thought process.
Wonderful. Thanks. So the next issue in the agenda is remove outdated reference to bundle.cnab and publish specs. This looks like a simple quick fix from Radu, if I understand correctly.
It is a simple quick fix, but it sort of highlights a potential problem with the process-ish, and I wish either Matt or Chris were here because they weighed in on the pull request as well. The background for this particular issue is that I was reading the specs from the start a couple of last week, and in section 100, which is the very first introduction to the CNAB spec, we still have a reference to a signed bundle being called the bundle.cnab, which is the very, very early prototype of doing PGP signing, where an unsigned bundle was bundle.json, and after you applied a PGP signature, it was a bundle.cnab. So that only could make the difference between those two. The problem is that we removed that very early on, but somehow one reference to bundle.cnab was still referenced in the published spec, both 1.0.0 and 1.0.1. So the main question I raised there is that this doesn't necessarily fall under an errata to the spec because it's not a formatting issue, it's not a grammatical error. But at the same time, I don't think it's a minor change to the spec either, because the change was never implemented, so we're not changing any implementations. It wasn't even implementable in the current text of the spec. So I think I proposed the 1.0.2, which is a patch to the current version. So I would like people to weigh in if they have thoughts about minors and patches and erratas and process to the spec. There's also an issue that describes how we do the process for versioning and releasing a new version to the spec. That is, I think, is linked in that issue. So if people have opinions, that'll be great.
So I can maybe, yeah, this is interesting. Technically, it'll be a breaking change if anyone had implemented it and would warrant a 2.0, but I don't think that this deserves it. We've seen similar situations in the tough spec itself where we made changes and not realized, wait a minute, this would actually be so we talked about, so in tough 1.0 spec, which is, we had introduced features that we never implemented ourselves, right? And we took them back. And we still kept a 1.0 as like a practical way of saying, okay, this is not, Rolf is wagging his finger. And we decided to be practical. So we called the other implementers, you know, the Rust people, the Google people, and we said, would you have a problem if we did this? And they were like, you know, as a practical consideration, it's fine. And we're like, going forward, we're not going to do this anymore. If there's a breaking change, it should be a, you know, what is it, major, minor patch? It should be a major increase. That's just my 2 cents here.
Yeah, I don't think anyone implemented it, and it wasn't really implementable. It was one sentence in the introduction that was never updated, right? I don't think there was any assumption that that sentence was to be respected and implemented in current runtimes. But yeah, technically it's not an errata. It could be a minor, but yeah, I definitely gravitate towards a patch just because it's the easiest process out of them all. But yeah, I definitely see the other part where, well, it's not technically a patch either.
I think it's
Sounds
not a
like
patch because, as you said, no one could have implemented it. No one did.
If it helps with the decision at all, when I was looking at the spec initially, it just seemed like that was something that was forgotten to be taken out. So my first reaction was to ignore it.
I mean, strangely, it's like a reverse typo. You know you should have changed it. You just forgot.
Cool. It sounds like happily we have a resolution here. So that's great. Okay, let's see. Next thing on the agenda. Apparently it's me. Quick fix for a broken link and security spec. Yes, this one should be super easy. It's just that the link is broken. That's it. Just needs an approval. One more approval. So someone could please take a quick look and give it a nice green check mark. That would be super fantastic. I think we can move on to the next item, which is establish trust for multiple registries. Anything else before merging? Radu, please take it from here. 332.
We've had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about whether the spec the security spec or the registry spec should tackle the issue about establishing trust between multiple registries and the runtime. And I think there was a pull request that Prashank opened a couple of weeks ago, and Glenn and I weighed in on the PR itself. I just wanted to bring the PR up again and mention that it has not been merged yet. And if anyone has any additional thoughts about it, now would be the time. I think it has enough reviews to get merged. I just wanted to bring it out there that your thoughts can be heard before merging.
Yeah, I would like to particularly hear from Glenn to see if he's happy with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we ended up with some caveats, which is what I was looking for, just to make it clear that trusting arbitrary registries and root certificates and so on was fraught with problems. I think we've got enough hints in there just to give a warning shot to any newcomers or naive readers. So I'm happy with it.
Awesome, sounds great. So I think Radu can probably merge this, no? I don't have merge.
Yeah, I'll have a look one more time to see if it's out of date with master or anything, but yeah, I can definitely merge it if it goes well.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Okay, and I think we have one more last official agenda item at least, which is update on key delegations for in-toto or the supply chain security stuff. That's issue 356. That's me and Radu.
Yeah, just for the background, we had a meeting with Justin Cormack last week, and yeah, Prashank, do you want to chat about what we went through?
Sure. Yeah. So Ralph organized a very nice meeting with Justin Cormack from Docker, Radu, myself, and we asked Justin about how we would do what we want to do. So let me send a quick picture actually so that it makes more sense. Let me see if I have the quick, okay, there it is. So if you take a look at this, if you take a look at figure 2 down there, we're trying to support a particular key model. The basic idea is that we want one particular important key called the targets key to sign for supercritical in-toto stuff that really no machine should be signing, right? Developers should sign up on it. And then we want a machine key to sign the rest of the in-toto stuff, which is harmless because they can't really misbehave. We can detect misbehavior. Great. The question is whether no tree can support this behavior. And we had 3 options. One option was to fork Notary and make it do what we wanted to do, which was not great. So we decided to skip that. The second option was to upstream changes to Notary to make it do what we wanted to do, right? And we talked about this. It was potentially useful, but I didn't see a way to change Docker's behavior, not Notary's behavior, without actually breaking backwards compatibility for them. It would change the semantics of how they check for keys. So not great. The third option is what we all decided to go with, which the most practical option is that we basically hard code the delegation scheme. So in CNAB, we basically say, we expect that you will use in-toto on top of Notary in this particular manner. And that is at least for the reference implementation. If you wanted to do something else, you could, but this should satisfy most use cases, easily 80%, if not more, and I'm just being conservative. So that is the update. Does anyone have thoughts about this or concerns?
Yeah, so this allows us to use the current version of Notary, which is compatible with Docker CLI and other implementations of Notary without forking or without waiting for upstream changes, while still satisfying the biggest part of our requirement, which is to have a secure way of doing key delegations for the most important signing key for in-toto.
Cool, and we can send more details about this. Team no fork, yes, awesome. I'm on the same page. We should make that a hashtag. The other update we have for you this week on the same subject is that Radu and I and the NYU team met yesterday to discuss how do we meaningfully discuss the security analysis for using in-toto on CNAB. And the too long didn't read version is that the problem is everyone has different software supply chains, right? And we can't say we can't analyze the security of your supply chain. What we can say is if we give you a simple example and we say, if you do this and this and this, you get this security, and that's the best we can do. We can't analyze your security model, right? But another great point that Radu brought up on the same topic is that when we're designing all of this in Siny, we should really, so the way we're trying to make tough easy to use, right? Using Notary with Siny, just as easy as to use as with Notary and Docker Notary, is that we need to make the in-toto stuff easy to use too. Otherwise, no one's going to use it, right? So Ralph and Radu have raised this point before many times, which is that you got to make security easy to use. Like, I don't know what keys you're talking about. And this is the kind of stuff that we should hide away from most people. So on that subject, we're planning to introduce basically software supply chain templates that you can reuse and not really think about it. And hopefully it works for, like, you know, like I said, 80% of use cases. And if it doesn't, we'll be happy to add more templates, right? And work it through. But we should give people templates that they can just use without thinking about it and be assured that this is going to give the these and this and these security guarantees.
The main issue is if you've had, I'm just curious, has anyone read through the in-toto spec from this call? Yeah, it's fairly, go ahead, sorry.
I read it but didn't understand it.
That counts as well. Yeah, it takes quite a few
Me too, to be honest. It takes multiple readings and working with it, right? We don't expect anyone to, it's not a failing on your part, just to be clear.
Yeah, so the underlying point here is that it's difficult to grasp what guarantees the spec gives you, and it's even more difficult to write a layout with verifications from scratch. And as long as user experience tooling doesn't give you a very simple path towards from nothing to having a minimal supply chain step verification, people are not going to do it because it's difficult to write an entire workflow from scratch. So the whole point is we should give people a template that is simple enough that they can understand, but significant enough that it gives any sort of meaningful guarantees as to what's happening to your workflow. The problem is that everyone's workflow is different. So we were chatting mainly about having something like checking Git commits, like, which is something that everyone understands, but it's simple enough. It gives you a meaningful way of validating that, yes, the source code that I have has actually been signed by this developer with this key, which is hopefully something that most people understand when they look at a supply chain workflow.
Exactly. To get the strongest security guarantees with in-toto, there really should be, not only should your pipeline, your software supply chain, the rules for that be immutable, which is why we're doing this whole, going through this whole, bothering to think about delegations at all, right? But just because your software, the rules for your pipeline is fixed, you also need something in your pipeline to be like sort of offline, you know, signed by a human developer, not machines. If it's all signed by machines, it really doesn't give you too much. Because machines can lie. Machines can say, I signed off this source code, right? So that's the thing we got to do. And then there'll be trickier questions later on, like, okay, I know I signed off on this Docker file. I know a human being signed it. How do I know, for example, my Bazel builders built the right container out of it? And this is a very tricky problem to solve, unfortunately. Reproducible builds on containers are not really there yet. When people mean reproducible builds in Bazel, it's not exactly bit for bit reproducible. So it's more like fixing your package versions and so on, but there's still other sources of non-determinism there. And we can talk about this later, but we don't have to worry about this right now. We can talk about this caveat in the spec and say, if you're really worried, you should address this, but this is out of the spec.
Yeah, it is. We're not trying to solve immutable builds in the spec. And just to be clear, this is not something that we should tackle at the spec level, rather at the implementation level. So this is not something holding up the spec. The spec should only describe how the metadata should be distributed and what keys should be used, not anything other than that. So just to be clear, this is implementation detail and user experience rather than spec work.
I mean, you mentioned signing Git commits, and lots of people are familiar with that. Are there other subsets of the in-toto spec that you could kind of explain in a simple way that, obviously not a total solution, but which people could grasp? If you could explain enough subsets and then say, and by the way, if you put them all together, you've got the full shooting match. That would be quite a nice approach.
Sure. Let me try giving. So would you like to see a document or actually walking through, a quick walkthrough of like a real life example?
I'd prefer a document so I can read it.
Okay.
Others
Here's
may...
a blog post that hopefully helps. This is a very high level overview. If you want to, you can go through all the technical details, but this talks about how we use stuff in in-toto at Datadog for our agent integrations. They're basically like little plugins for our agent. And here's the claim. These agents, these integrations, these plugins are basically Python packages. They're pure Python source code. There's no binary here. So we don't need to worry about reproducible builds. And here's what we've done. We can guarantee that an attack anywhere between developers signing that Python source code and our end users getting tarballs of that source code, basically zip files, we can detect attacks anywhere in between our, our infrastructure. And in my mind, I don't think anyone's talked about this publicly, at least. There's nothing publicly available that gives you the same guarantees. And we talk about how we did it. So hopefully it's useful.
Yeah, thank you. First, I mean, just skimming it really quickly, it looks quite complex straight off. The first figure has got, a dozen boxes on it. So I was hoping something more down the level of this is a signed Git commit, right? What other component parts of TUF are there that's that simple? We're just talking about a signature.
There is a website that the NYU team did that is a visual workflow or supply chain definition. It's essentially a wizard that asks you what version control are you using? How are you testing your source code? How are you building your source code, right? And you can actually type in the command that you use that would finally generate the in-toto verification process for you. So let me find that. Yeah, I think
it's been posted.
Yeah. So if you look through that, that should be the type of process that could be useful to understand when it comes to building an in-toto verification process that is very tied into the software development process. Of course, it's still opinionated and it still makes some assumptions about make and VS make and other types of tooling, but hopefully it gives you a sort of a general idea about the types of processes that can be verified through in-toto.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. That's it from us. We don't want to bore people endlessly with this stuff. So that's it. That is officially the end of the agenda. Does anyone want to talk about anything else?
Yeah, I just want to point out that we have a whole hour on the off week on Wednesday at the same time where we bore each other with this stuff for an entire hour.
Exactly.
Prashank and I.
So that's the attendance, is it? 2 usually.
Well,
Jacob usually, and Ralph sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes I get in there and I'm like, okay, wait, what does that word mean again?
Yeah.
That's essentially my contribution. So Glenn,
I could do that.
So,
yeah, exactly. So I look at Trishank's diagram and I go, yeah, okay, let's rip the right hand off completely. Just start with no, seriously, this stuff is hard, so you really have to sort of work through the details to understand it.
Unfortunately, it's a little bit complicated, but once you cache it in your brain, it's like, oh, okay, I get it now. Why didn't these guys just explain it that way?
I rather think that it's very, very similar to actual authentication and authorization, which is just completely difficult because it's basically overlapping set theory. And that just is hard to internalize. It takes a lot of experience and practice.
I think from my perspective, we're trying to make the TUF sign and signature process as transparent as possible for anyone using our tooling.
Yep.
And we're trying to make sure that the one person in the software team that understands software supply can have a minimum knowledge of in-toto.
Yes.
And the support in our tooling is there to enable them to use that. I think that is the goal that we have from the spec to allow it and the tooling to make it easy.
Exactly. Like we'll basically make these models, all these diagrams and come up with, and I'll say, if you're interested in this use case, don't worry about it. We basically have the code for you. Just use it if that works for you. That's the end goal.
We hope that organizations that are interested in supply chain have at least one person who understands supply chain.
If they don't, then supply chain issue is moot for them, and that's okay, right? Like that's totally fine. The internet is built with band-aids that are aging, so clearly people can get stuff done without it. But it'd be really nice if we could take a big step forward. Currently, I think we are. The only thing I do want to say is I trust in this complex world that everybody is staying safe and washing a lot and using a lot of cream on top of the wash so your hands don't dry out and all that good things. It's a very interesting world we live in right now, and it's not going to be uninteresting again for a little while. And so I wish all of you the best on a human level. Make sure you take care of yourselves. You're wonderful people to chat with. I'm pleased to, work with you at a distance, and hope we all get to continue to do this again. So take care.
Yeah.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.
Agree with that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.